and thank you for joining us today. I'm Mark Rohan. I'm the Senior Vice President of e-commerce and B2B market research, and we're here to talk about flexible e-commerce platforms, the future of B2B distribution. Today, legacy systems are slowing down B2B distributors in an era when adaptability and speed are critical. Let me say that again, slowing you down because you've got to be competitive, and that requires adaptability and speed. So you need flexible e-commerce platforms that evolve with shifting market conditions and customer expectations. So we're going to hit that nail on the head today, and we have a stellar panel here to kind of talk about things, and we're going to sort through some of the flotsam jetsam. And at the end of the hour, we think you're going to kind of come away here with actionable insights that you, across the board, big, small, or otherwise, can take and begin to make your platform what your B2B buyers want it to be. So keep in mind that despite our interesting times with tariffs and everything else, B2B e-commerce and digital commerce is a growth opportunity if you engage it with an intelligent platform. We're talking a $2.2, $2.3 trillion market. Yes, T for trillion, growing annually at about 16%. So my point is, despite current market conditions and flexibilities and inflexibilities, there is a lot of growth still out there. But the adaptive, integrated e-com platform has got to be there to kind of make things happen. So we're going to jump right into it. But before that, I'd like to introduce Dennis Clifford from Verto, who's going to give us a quick background on the technology you folks need to have in place to pull off that growth that's out there for everyone. Dennis, what do you got for us?
Thanks, Mark, and hi, everybody. I'm Dennis Clifford. I'm the Chief Customer Officer with Verto Commerce. Greeting from Cork in the south of Ireland. I hope you're all well. As Mark said, Verto Commerce, we're an e-commerce technology company. We do provide some of those flexible technologies that Mark has said. I don't want this in any way to be a sales pitch, because indeed there are others in that space, but I just wanted to share a couple of concepts just to illustrate that flexibility piece before we hand over to the other panelists, if that's okay. Just a bit about my own personal background, just while I'm doing that. For about 15 years, I worked with the Heineken company internationally. My background is not actually in technology at all. My main sources of interest are customer centricity, digital transformation, and topics like that. So Verto Commerce, we describe ourselves as innovative and business ready, and we're really about building e-commerce and marketplace solutions that indeed are flexible, to Mark's point. And legacy B2B e-commerce platforms, as maybe some of you are already finding, and certainly we're seeing in the market, are proving quite challenging to work with given the pace of change, the volatility that we see in global markets and in businesses generally. So a couple of things about us. We're globally distributed. The analysts have very nice things to say about us, and we're very happy to hear that. And we're located in probably 20 plus countries worldwide, predominantly, however, in the United States, where the bulk of our customers are based. And we have some recognizable brands in our portfolio of products, including Bosch, Heineken, and more. But this, I guess, is really the slide that I wanted to land on and just for a few minutes, Mark, just talk about, so it illustrates that flexibility piece that you were talking about a minute ago. Verto Commerce, our innovation platform, provides, in the middle of that slide, you can see all of the building blocks for customers to run their own e-commerce platform. And they can do that in one of two ways, or a combination of both. On the left, by using some of our pre-configured business capabilities and packaged business capabilities that we have, some modules like quoting, searches, order, content, etc. I think at the top of the call, Mark, we were chatting earlier, and you said there was a time in which the cart and the basket wasn't even part of an e-commerce platform. But everything now is decomposable and composable as customers want. And on the right-hand side, if there isn't an existing production-ready module for you to use, you can extend one of the existing modules or build your own. You can add your own CMS at the bottom, and as a result, create your own B2B marketplace, a customer portal, an e-commerce platform, a B2C marketplace, whatever you want to do. So the message I guess I'm trying to get across here is you should be able, you certainly can with Verto Commerce, other platforms are available, to compose and decompose, if you like, your e-commerce platform as required to give you the flexibility that you need. So I'll stop there in the interest of time and make sure my other panelists have an opportunity to get in on that one. Thanks, Mark.
And as I mentioned, I like to open with the fact that dinosaurs roamed the earth and I'm one. And so I have seen the evolution of the e-commerce platform go forward from 1998. That's how far I go back. And then I've seen this piece of technology become just that, a piece of technology evolving into the critical part of today's digital commerce ecosystem. And why I say that is today, the e-commerce platform is the mothership. It truly is the mothership. And depending upon whose tech stack you look at, whose numbers you look at, whose analysis you look at, there are 14 different technology touch points going across 11 B2B sales channels that all must be integrated across the enterprise, inside, outside to the platform. So that's why flexible B2B e-commerce infrastructure is critical today. And so we're going to jump into it here. Our panelists, we've got Rupa, Myron, Dennis, and Raul. And I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves, and we're going to jump right to the questions. So Rupa, tell us your background at Perficient, and what are your thoughts on flexible technology when it applies to e-commerce platforms these days, do you think? Just kind of quick opening question.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. Rupa Amin, Director of Commerce Platforms and Strategy at Perficient. It's a pleasure to be one of the panelists here today. In the past 20-some years that I've spent in the B2B commerce space, one of the most important and the exciting thing that I have seen is how quickly things evolve. You know, leaving so much room on the table for an opportunity for creating and innovating technologies, right? So when we think about the flexible commerce or the composable commerce, what I'm really excited about is how brands are adapting to this change. Because when we talk about technology, it's just not the technology. It's about the people, the process, and the mindset that comes with it. Yep. So today I'm excited for sharing some of the lessons we've learned at Perficient, especially around building flexible and scalable platform solutions that actually work for the businesses and not the other way around. So thank you for having me. And yeah, let's jump right in.
Well, you know, the thing is, guys like me are talking about it. Guys like Myron are in the trenches every day doing this. So Myron, you're at Partstown, you're living this stuff day in, day out. So tell us about you, tell us about Partstown, tell us what your kind of top level thoughts are on connected commerce these days, if you would.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Hello, everyone. Myron Washington, the Mary Maven of Digital, also known as the Chief Digital Officer. If you know anything about Partstown, we're a bit unique and we go by cultural titles. Thus, mine is the Mary Maven of Digital. I've been here about 2.5 years, and we are on an intentional journey to transform how we do digital things. Commerce platform is part of that journey, but there's also data, innovation, customer experiences. Before Partstown, I spent a fair number of years at Home Depot, Amazon. I grew up in corporate America at Hewlett-Packard in supply chain. So I kind of consider myself the accidental sort of CDO. Not the traditional route, to say the least, but I find myself in a great opportunity to help a multi-billion-dollar global company transform how to go to market, and super excited to share some of my learnings.
All right, and Raul, your relevance there, you integrate this stuff. What are your thoughts, and what's your background here, do you think?
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. My name is Rahul Maheshwari. I'm a founder, CEO of Revision Labs. We are a B2B digital solutions partner company. Before starting Revision Labs, I spent 15 years in the corporate IT, working for large enterprise, Fortune 20 companies, building scalable distributed e-commerce systems. And after starting Revision Labs, we are helping manufacturers and distributors to help optimize grow their business through innovative B2B e-commerce solutions, AI-driven automations, digital transformation initiatives. We bring in the deep domain expertise. We work with the industry day in, day out. We help them to understand get the most out of their investment. We understand the unique challenges faced by the industry. And we have seen how things can go horribly wrong with the great intentions. And that's why, I think the flexible commerce, connected e-commerce, they're all fancy words, but if you don't have the right knowledge team and the skill set and the pre-planning, you will not get your return on your investment. So I think that's where kind of we bring in the insight on doing a multiple implementation for our clients, and we are also one of the authorized virtual commerce solution partner. Just everyone to know.
Well, Dennis, I want to circle back to that very interesting slide you just showed. And my first question to the panel, beginning with Dennis here, is I can't believe we're still talking about this one. I really can't. I mean, I heard this 20 years ago, which is why are the biggest limitations in B2B distribution still tied to, when it comes to connected commerce, having to do with legacy systems? Yeah. How do they hinder growth? And why are we still talking about this, do you think?
Yeah, we probably shouldn't be, to be fair, Mark, still talking about this. But unfortunately, we are. There are good reasons for it. I think, replatforming from, an e-commerce platform that you've had for a while, it's not a small undertaking, depending on how significant your digital channel is. If that's a very large portion of your business, it's not a large undertaking. I also think that because modular commerce, connected commerce, etc., is evolving so quickly, there may be some reticence around, well, do I move now? Do I wait? What do I wait for? What's the next thing? Is now the right time to get on it? But there are a couple of areas where it's really holding businesses back, at least in my personal opinion. If you think about things like pricing, for example, pricing can often be really inflexible in legacy e-commerce platforms. And pricing at the moment, particularly, I think, for distributors, for wholesalers, I mean, pricing is always, vitally important to get right. Margins are tight, etc. But I think now pricing volatility to do with supply chain availability of products, the number of places you need to source products from, and so on, means you now need to have pricing engines that are going much, much faster than what you're used to. So that's an issue. And I also think you want your sales reps to be doing things based on their experience, not on manual tasks. So another area where we see it holding back is, using a really flexible e-commerce platform, you can produce experiences that customers will love. And we know, Rupa, you made a point, we were chatting even earlier about B2C experiences, right? So you can build really lovely B2C type experiences that buyers will love. They're very happy to order their products. And then you can free up your sales reps and other people in your organization to use their considerable experience with the product to enhance all of that and to really help customers to grow their own business and so on. But actually, legacy e-commerce platforms aren't great at producing those B2C type experiences that customers love. So I understand why we might still be talking about it, but we've really got to encourage everybody to go out and embrace some of that new technology. Because there are further revolutions coming with AI, which will really accelerate and turbocharge all of that stuff.
Well, Rupa, let's follow up with you on that, since Dennis kind of made a point of a few things. I mean, we got to be real here. I mean, budgets are budgets, the times being what they are. I mean, not just e-com. There's a lot of cap spending there's a lot of tech spending being capped out there for a lot of organizations. So in some cases, legacy systems are still a fact of life. So if they're a fact of life, what are your thoughts? How do you make them more flexible? And what's the opportunity there, do you think, if you can kind of make them even work a little bit more integrated than they are now? What are your thoughts on that?
Before we even talk about the limitations of legacy systems, I think we have to understand why they are so limited, right? Because they're siloed, they're inflexible, they're difficult to integrate when we talk about modern tools. Early on in my introduction, I talked about how this space continues to evolve, and that drives my interest. And so when we really talk about the modern tools, these legacy systems, they end up creating friction for the businesses. They hinder the growth, not only just from being a digital first experience that most of the buyers are expecting today. When I'm looking at the Forrester analyst reports, they're talking about 50% or more of the large B2B purchases, we're talking over 1 million, will be processed through those digital self-service channels just in 2025. So when we at Perficient talk to brands and businesses, And we're thinking that if your systems can't even support a digital self-service channel in this day and age, you're not only behind, you're somewhat invisible to your audience, right? And so when we look at leading distributors that constantly face challenges with fragmented systems, they have so many ERP systems that are just installed from one acquisition to another that are global. They continue to create confusion for that end customer, right? Because your end customer is not just one individual. It's creating inconsistent experiences globally. And so when the organizations look at building, whether we call it, Raul said, unified or flexible or whichever fun term we use, I think they just have to be streamlined. In terms of operations, in terms of just driving faster order processing, because ultimately brands are looking for that increased customer satisfaction at the end of the day, right? All of it kind of rolls up into that space. So
Myron, you were telling us your corporate career here. I think you've seen your fair share of legacy systems. So, what are your thoughts on legacy systems integration today, and how do you make do or get past in an age when a lot of organizations just have to kind of make do with it because they can't afford to move on? So, any thoughts on limitations of legacy systems from your perspective in Parstown?
Yeah, man. So my point of view is, legacy systems happen for a reason, right? They enabled, if I take sort of Parstown, for example, they enabled Parstown to go to market and sort of win market share, right? But as sort of ambitions grow and sort of customers' needs, purpose, concerns change over time, to Rupa's point, that systems become quite troublesome, almost inflexible to meet those sort of demands. And I think one of the things that, sort of challenges B2B legacy systems and companies really goes back to points both Dennis and Rahul made, both on the sort of ROI. How do you justify replatforming, and at what point do you bring that sort of justification in? And then, sort of the people and the process component. Do I have a right folks on the bus to actually lead that change from a technical perspective? Do I have a process in place, for example, a vendor management process to vet the different technologies that are available for an organization to choose? And then just the overall change management within an organization to get buy-in that we are moving from, hey, picking up the phone to, agents self-serve. All that comes into the equation when an organization thinks about that transformation journey. And so it's not easy, but to Rupa's point, it's like, if you're not willing and you don't commit to make the change, you will essentially find yourself further and further behind the competition.
Raul, I wanted to follow up on legacy systems with maybe a different spin, which is our second question, which is there's a need for balance here. Distribution companies, big, small, otherwise, have got to balance teams, assets, budgets, you name it, as it applies to commerce technology. So from your perspective, how can B2B distributors balance the need for scalability and flexibility without overhauling their entire infrastructure, do you think? Let's start with that.
Absolutely, Mark. I think one advice that we give to our customers, don't take the replatforming as an IT initiative, IT project as one-time thing done and move on, right? It's important to take the phased approach to identify the high impact digital components that you can build on top of it, right? If you have a legacy system, if that's the core of your business, you don't want it has years of custom logic built into it, right? You don't even have a people there anymore. We have seen some of these legacy systems built 30 years ago, right? Now, instead of trying to replace them with a brand replatform project, I think it's important to take that phased approach. Maybe you can build some kind of API layer around your legacy system, and then leverage e-commerce platforms like composable e-commerce platform that can connect with your e-commerce system. You have to think from the not just right now as a replatform, right? You have to think from 10 years from now that can you evolve with the changing buyer behaviors in the market. And my co-panelists talk about how the B2B buyer experience is changing, right? How the shop and how the business needs to keep up with that. So, when you do that, trying to re-platform it, it's important to get not bringing the legacy processes and the things that you have done into your new systems, right? You have to try to get most out of the platform. Dennis talked about how WorldCommerce has a lot of different capabilities. Try to leverage those capabilities instead of trying to do everything custom or outside the platform. So those are some of the things that are important for anyone trying to take this big initiative to either re-platform it or take the phased approach to make sure you balance the scalability and the flexibility at the same time.
Well, Dennis, I want to pivot back to you because in this day and age, pivoting is probably a pretty key word here. So, from Verto's perspective, how can distributors balance scale and flexibility without overhauling the entire infrastructure, do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mark. In fairness, I think just one thing before I answer that one, if you don't mind, just something that I think everybody has picked up on, and I want to sort of underline the point.
You bet.
And I'm doing this because, as I said at the top, I don't actually come from a technology background, despite the fact that I work for an e-commerce technology company. And I think we've all kind of half said it, so I'm going to make sure it's really clear. In any kind of digital transformation project, so as Rupa was saying, if you're not offline, you're invisible. If you decide you're going to digitize your route to market in your business, even we would say that more than 50% of the effort in that project is on non-technical topics. And there's a huge business change management component to that, particularly if you've never been online before and you're trying to digitize that. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and this is the connection to the legacy, let's say ERPs or whatever people are using. Very often you will have had to adapt your business processes over the years to the limitations of your ERP. So your business process becomes the ERP process and not the other way around, if you know what I mean. So how you manage everything from, I don't know, buying to scheduling deliveries to whatever. An awful lot of that stuff is actually dictated by how your ERP wants to handle the data to make that process kind of happen in the background, if you like. So I bring this up because if you have some, let us say, aging e-commerce platform attached to your ERP and you're going to replace that, or you're going to turbocharge your digital experience in some way, an awful lot of what you're going to have to do is business change as well as technical change. And as Byron rightly said, you need to have the right people on the bus in order to do that bit as well. How can you kind of balance it? Well, you don't have to unplug everything, so we don't have to tear the whole thing out and throw it in the garbage. A lot of modern systems using APIs can talk to each other much more easily than they would have done in the past. It is much easier to build connected systems of various pieces of software, etc. So you can do this on a gradual basis. It's not something that you have to do all in one go. And the other thing I would say is to start with the higher friction processes first. So think about ordering, think about searching for products, think about account self-service and things like that, and to try and use those. Use headless e-commerce platforms. So you're replacing a new engine, but you're keeping all of the content that your customers already see on the front end the same. So this is not, about ripping and replacing. It's about a gradual augmentation. I think that's really the way to tackle it. Sure, otherwise you'll be awake half the night stressed about it, right? So try and do it in a kind of gradual way is important.
Well, Myron, do you have an example from Partstown you could talk about how Partstown? I mean, you guys are pretty you guys are pretty innovative over there, as I think our audience knows. I certainly do. But do you have an example you could talk about how you've done flexibility and scalability when assets are what they are?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Dennis and Rahul hit the nail on the head. It is not a, swallow the elephant in one bite approach. It is a sort of pragmatic approach to change and evolution. And for us, we started with the data. And specifically, we started instrumenting our data in an enterprise PIM, right? We didn't have one for a number of decades. And one of the first big initiatives when I came on board was to solve for that area of concern. And once that was in play, we went to sort of the core purchase experience, right? So nothing in sort of the back office, but really sort of the front end experiences. And within the front end experiences, whether it was part findability, checkout, post-transaction, we identified where 70% of the revenue was coming from throughout those sort of experiences, and then attacked decomposing those different experiences. So for example, we instrumented a new checkout page that is separate from the back sort of office, and that change allows us to do rapid iterations and different sort of test user experiences where we can sort of see what is going to drive the highest conversion, and we're methodically going through different pages of our site to bring about that area change.
Rupa, you brought this up, and now we're going to continue it. So my point there is kind of going back to this B2C, B2B comparison. I want to start our next question with you. What are the most critical features of a modern e-commerce platform that enable personalized customer experiences within that transaction? So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, basically what we're asking here is how do you integrate flexible, how do you connect the connective tissue to kind of make this a more B2C experience when the platform might not be as flexible as you would want?
The three key words, right? So critical features, modern commerce experience, and then we say B2B. That's a natural triangulation. And I feel like when we talk about the B2B personalization, it's all about the relevance at scale, right? So if you think about contract pricing, custom catalog, intelligent search, a lot of great ideas that we have already talked about. But with the millennials and the Gen Zs coming in that are now influencing over 50% of our B2B buying journeys and decision-making processes, I feel like the platforms must support some of these experiences that feel intuitive and tailored. There's AI that is jumping on the bandwagon here, right? So AI-driven recommendations. How do you create experiences that are more behavior-based and that are no longer optional? These are table stake capabilities that customers and our buyers are looking for in the platforms. And everyone uses this example, and I'm gonna be no different, but Amazon businesses, like we look at them and they offer features like role-based accesses, purchasing workflows, tailored catalogs. So when we look at their successes, it has pushed the traditional distributors to rethink how they deliver this personalized experiences at scale. And to me, the whole composable commerce architecture is a game changer here. When we talk about connecting the tissues between the B2B and the B2C, it's really strategizing on which pieces get executed in what order. And when we talk about this big overhaul or big project, or whether to call it rip and replace, like Dennis mentioned it, it's really just defining what is the key strategy that is going to drive the most value, and how are you going to define and measure your outcomes? Because without a key strategy in place, execution is just lost, and vice versa. So to me, it's the regulations and the experiences, they come at scale, but then drive it with the right amount of strategy is what I would.
Raul, your company name is very apropos here because we're talking relevance. And so from your perspective, what are the most critical elements of a modern commerce platform that enable personalized customer experiences in B2B?
Mark, I would say, Rupa and others have covered extensively on the critical features of, any modern e-commerce platform, whether there's a personalized pricing to contract pricing to, AI search powered. I think I would want to focus on, instead of just trying to blindly copy the B2C features and experience on B2B platform, I think it's very important to understand how they go about doing it, right? They have a great customer feedback loop. So you don't want to just start throwing out this bunch of these features for B2B. You want to listen to your customers, listen to your buyers, see what they are asking for, what they're looking for, right? And then try to go provide those solutions, to see if they are making any difference to it. And second point I would like to bring, from the not just from the buyer's perspective, but you should think about from the technical features of any modern e-commerce platform, right? It needs to have a robust API-based integration. Can it be a scalable solution? If right now you're starting out small, but can it scale to satisfy your demand, right? Nowadays we're talking about AI for the past few years. Is it how easy it is to incorporate the AI-powered workflows automations in your e-commerce platform, right? So those are the important things to look from a technical feature perspective for any e-commerce platform, I would say. And that should be part of your evaluation process when selecting any vendor platform.
So Dennis, pivoting to you, to use the phrase, may we live in interesting times, I think certainly applies now.
Yeah.
So our next question has to do with this. How have economic and geopolitical factors like inflation, supply chain disruption, let alone this whole tariff episode we're going through now, how has that impacted B2B buying behavior? And more importantly, how can flexible platforms help mitigate those risks? You've got to be more flexible now than ever before. And if you're not, you're going to miss out on the op here to kind of grow. So what are your thoughts on that, do you think?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mark. We are living in some very interesting times. I think it's important to say as well that that's likely to persist for some time in some way, shape, or form. So there are a number of impacts certainly that we're seeing more on the business strategy side. So as I said, my main areas of interest in working with vertical commerce customers are in their digital strategies, how they become more customer centric, how they respond to customer demands, and what you've outlined really sits in the middle of all of that kind of stuff. There is tremendous pricing volatility at the moment. So certainly if I was working as a distributor at the moment, I'm extremely concerned about the sources of supply, the price of that supply versus what I'm selling at, the margins for that, how much stock can I hold on hand, and all of that sort of stuff. Your buyers are probably going to be demanding much higher levels of transparency about how much stock do you have, what price am I going to have it at, and when am I going to have that. And more flexible, let's say modern composable e-commerce platforms like vertical commerce allow you to do that because of the connectivity that we've all been talking about, these APIs that everybody's saying. You can connect very easily to various different warehouse management systems, transportation systems, geo positioning about where deliveries are, and so on and so forth. The other thing we're seeing is that supply chains are fragmenting. So your initial source of supply for products may not be that source of supply. It may not also be the exclusive source of that product that it was before. And if you have exclusive contracts, you're having to go outside to find alternative sources of supply. Again, modular e-commerce systems can deal with that level of change and flexibility required in order to do that. Particularly, I would say on some of the front-end experience bit, you can better inform your customers well. Previously, your source for that product was X. Now it's going to be Y. This is what the delivery change is going to be. The other thing I think that's interesting, Mark, that we're seeing as well is in terms of the strategic priorities for businesses, we were seeing probably over the previous 2 years a huge rise in discussion about circular commerce, re-commerce, sustainable commerce, and topics like that. I think because of the immediacy of concerns around the economics at the moment of operating as a distributor, that has slipped down a little bit down the agenda a little bit. But I do foresee that when things do settle, that's going to come way back up to the top of the list again. But yeah, they're just some of the things we're seeing. It's volatile. It's it's hard for sure.
Well, Myron, maybe we could talk about one of the more innovative, one of the most innovative things I think I've seen in distribution land for quite some time, which I think is a prime example of being flexible in times of change here, which is your Partstown Part Predictor, which is a direct use of AI, I think, to kind of meet the topic we're talking about here. Would you mind talking about that for just a minute or two? What that is, how that met flexibility needs for the for your audience out there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Together?
Yeah, absolutely. So for context, Part Predictor is a sort of industry first part findability methodology that we launched about a year ago here at Partstown, and really sort of the genesis of that is Partstown is sort of two parts of our business. There's the distribution part, we distribute parts, and we have a service organization. We have field technicians that go out and will repair equipment. Each of those repair events creates a work order, and we have millions of work orders associated with this particular manufacturer, this particular brand, this particular model, this particular issue resulted in this part needed to fix that issue. We stitch that all together in an AI-generated AI engine and created a front-end experience that our customers can now, based on a manufacturer model and a symptom, get directed to the part most likely used to fix that particular symptom. And so it's been in the market for about a year and a half. It generates a significant amount of revenue just based on conversion. That conversion is probably 200 basis point in terms of our other product finding methodologies. So it's been absolutely sort of a resounding success, and we're continuing to iterate it as we speak.
And Rupa, I want to shift gears a little bit, but that's a great example of how one forward-thinking distribution company is using not just what they have on hand, but also AI to meet the changing needs of that B2B buyer. But having said that, I'm going to go back to one of our sticky points out there in B2B land, which is ERP systems. So my next question to you has to do with what are the key challenges in transitioning from a traditional ERP system to a modern, flexible e-commerce platform? And I know it's easier said than done, but you folks look at this every single day, I would think. So what are your thoughts on that?
We talked about piling on, a phased approach or just starting with, bits and pieces of it. But when I really think about the two top challenges that organizations face when they're especially dealing with the complex situations is the integration complexities and the change management. I have worked with many brands where this has become such a sticking point, if you will, when we're talking about ERPs, because ERPs, they weren't built for this real-time scenarios. They were not built for customer-facing experiences. They were built with a certain intent in mind to operationalize businesses in the day and the age that they were defined in. So when we look at McKinsey companies, they're looking at hybrid modernization path. They want to see faster ROI, less disruption. Can that happen overnight? Not really. When you look at mid-sized organizations to large-scale organizations, everyone's trying to transition from a legacy ERP into this headless commerce platforms. And so the big thing that to me comes as a utmost importance is the maturity of the organization. Some organizations are going to be mature in their business and the operations, and some are going to be technically mature. And so defining where that balance is, finding that right SI who is going to help you decouple the experiences. So Myron talked about how they have leveraged AI and built a front-end experience on top of it to deliver a faster, easier to do business with part finder experience. It's really just identifying how are you going to deliver on those front-end experiences separate from the back-end system so that ultimately you're driving that improved site performance. And we talked about a lot of things, but one new thing that I would like us to stay a little attentive to is reducing the cart abandonment and just thinking about how are you going to increase your online sales from year after year, right? So defining what those KPIs are going to look like. Rahul talked about the voice of the customer. Well, with every changing dynamic, given the current situation we're in, the voice of the customer is different. So when you think about a flexible commerce system, it's really the brands are looking for those turnkey features. Do they want to continue to spend dollars in developing customizations, developing complex integrations? No, they're probably going to look for a configurable product that is going to get them a faster track to market.
Raul, quick war story. And this sticks in my mind. A couple years ago, I went out to a trade show, which I go to quite a bit, and I met a very forward-thinking, very blunt, honest individual, and he was in charge of e-com for his B2B distribution company. They're in electrical supplies. Been around for 60, 70, 85 years, something like that. Anyway, we had a beer, and the guy's telling me his story, and he said, look, he said, it has not been easy for us. First, they had to kind of sell e-com into a traditional organization that didn't really know anything about it. The CEO said, great, you're in charge, go do it. So, he put his team together, and the guy's a great planner, great organizer, great getting things done kind of guy. Put his team together. They went out, got the budget from the CEO, wrestled it, I might say, put together a brand new e-commerce platform. Took them 18 months to do it. They're ready to go. And guess what? Their ERP system was a frickin' mess. And they had to go back to the drawing board. They had to reconfigure and put in a brand new ERP system, and they were still not done. Once they got the ERP system in and began integrating it to the new e-commerce platform, it turns out their data was a mess. They had to go back and rewrite 200,000 SKUs in taxonomy to make those two ends meet. Bottom line, it took that company what they thought was going to be a year to get from zero to B2B e-commerce, took them 3 years. And that is a mid-sized, old line B2B distribution companies. I think a lot of those guys are out there. So a bit long-winded from me, but that's happening a lot out there. So my point to you is, I think ERP legacy systems are still an issue out there. So what are your thoughts on touching on what Raul did, or what Rupert just talked about, to make these able to integrate into a more flexible, connective platform?
I agree with you, Mark, 100%. There are plenty of brands out there with legacy system, legacy ERP, and they are trying to move to e-commerce, and things go horribly wrong along the way. What supposed to be 1 year project turns to multi-year projects with no end in sight, and just gets into a huge mess. And and what you promise to the business or executives, right, you might not be close to that. One of the biggest issue we talked about is the integration. That's number one issue when it comes to integration, and it's absolutely right. Important to do a pre-planning to understand the data that you have in your ERP. You need to do a proper data mapping to the if you're going with any e-commerce platform, right? You understand the data schema on that platform and do a pre-planning in terms of the integration. You need to also understand the scalability. It's very difficult to do a data synchronization. That's it's not just legacy to ERP to e-commerce platform, right? Any system, when you're trying to connect them together, how are you going to keep the data in sync, right? That's always a big challenge. And it's and you might be able to sync the data, but it's important how you're going to keep them in sync in real time as the buyer's needs are shifting. You want to show the real-time pricing to the customers, right? You want to show the real-time inventory to your buyers. So it's very important that that integration layer is solid, and you are using the right platform like VertoCommerce, that is API first customizable platform that can easily connect to your ERP via some kind of integration platform, or it can be middleware. The other thing I will talk about, you might be able to put together integration, but can it scale, right? If you have 2,000 SKUs, well, all and good, right? But if you have million SKUs, we have customers who have 8 million SKUs, how are you gonna keep those two systems in sync? Where you mentioned, Mark, the geopolitical and COVID and stuff. Things are unstable, things are in flux. So if your prices are changing every day just because of the tariffs are going up, how are you going to apply those bulk price update to your millions of SKUs and sync back to the e-commerce platform? So those are very important points to consider when planning your transitioning, whether you're transitioning or connecting your ERP to your modern e-commerce platform. I would say.
Well, Dennis, I'd like to kind of go to maybe our next question here. And this kind of falls back into the fact I was hoping to kind of get some best practice advice for our attendees today. So my question to you is, what are the most common mistakes companies make when adopting flexible commerce platforms, and how can they avoid them?
There's probably a few things, Mark, based on our experience. I think you shouldn't assume that flexibility means that there are no rules. So actually, governance is a very important part of something like this, because you can regularly change, update, add modules in, take modules out. I'm talking about vertical commerce here. It's very important to have the governance of that in place in order to make it work right. The role of the, let's say, product owner, the person who's going to be reflecting both the needs of the customer and the demands of the business and directing how that platform is going to work. That role is extremely important. And they have to govern that. If you're, let's say, multi-state, if you're multi-geography, multi-country, that becomes even more important. The other best practice I would suggest, and Myron was talking about something very similar, is to get the data right. I had a great colleague who worked in Heineken in the UK for a number of years, and they had a very simple line that said, if you don't have a process for something offline, don't put it online. And also, as soon as you put your data out for customers to see, they're going to start calling you to tell you it's wrong. So you better have it right. I think, Myron, which is what you were talking about. So, more, let's say, modern, for want of a better word, e-commerce platforms allow you to show so much more data that UX can be so kind of nuanced and personalized. And that all sounds absolutely fantastic. But for goodness sake, get the data right. Otherwise, you're going to kind of upset everybody. In terms of the governance, I would say another piece is around the internal alignment. So, that you have a really good change team put in place to either, for the first time, take your business online or re-platform from an older system. So they're just a couple of things I would say to keep in mind. Yeah, if you're going to adapt a more modular, composable, whatever you want to call it, e-commerce platform into the future.
Well, let's shift back to you with the same question, which is, what are some mistakes to avoid, do you think, in making your platform more flexible? What's your advice there, do you think?
I would say 3 points, and I might have mentioned those in my previous answers. One of them is the lack of strategic alignment and leadership support. You want to make sure you don't just have buy-in from executive, but different stakeholders involved in the process, right? So you understand that, that what you're going to be delivering with the flexible platform, what's going to be the end product here. The second important point, what we see is the over customization. Like a lot of times the platforms, they provide tons of features. WaterCommerce has, I think Dennis mentioned about 80 different business capabilities. Most likely you don't need to build anything extra. What we see is, with the lack of training or lack of right skill set, they go about doing really over customization, and where they reach a point where there's no turning back. That slows you down, that increases your maintenance, it increases your overall TCO, a total cost of ownership. And it just, business is not going to be happy. They're not going to see what features they say they're looking for in the speed and the agility so those are important things too. And the last thing I want to add here is the not defining the clear success metrics. When it comes to we talk about alignment and over customization, stuff like that, but you need to have the clearly defined metrics. Are we talking about the order conversions or moving offline sales to online sales? What are our clear KPIs? Those are very important to be defined in the beginning, and that will set you for success in the future.
Myron, I want to pivot back to you on kind of a key point here. So we just talked about part predictor, but what I'm doing here is transitioning into the whole idea of what role does AI play in customer engagement, e-commerce platform flexibility, and connected commerce. I mean, one of the reasons we asked you to come be on our panel today is because you folks are ahead of the AI ballgame. So when it comes to flexibility and platform management, can you talk about that just a little bit? What role does that play? And more importantly, what role will it play, do you think?
Yeah, maybe for our response, I heard a colleague use this in a different with a different persona, but I'll apply the persona to myself. And he said AI is not going to replace the chief digital officer, but AI will replace the chief digital officer not using AI. So with that being said, like if anyone out there isn't leaning into AI in meaningful and material ways, you could be potentially at risk. Going back to your question, it's in every facet of the experience. We talked about, so I'll bring it back to sort of the composable sort of framework. We're looking at, sort of different sort of search capabilities, but we're only looking at search capabilities that are fundamentally AI driven. We're looking at different recommendation engines, but we're only looking at recommendation engines that have embedded AI. And so you can go down the entire stack. And if you're not like sourcing those composable applications that are fundamentally AI driven, you will have an architecture and experiences that are fundamentally missing the boat. When I came into sort of the chief digital officer arena, I would say, you could from an experiential point of view, largely have this sort of the FANG approach to experience: Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. And if you sort of, swam in their wake, you'd probably be doing okay. But I would say if you're not now in, Copilot, ChatGPT, Perplexity, OpenAI, Claude, you're going to be missing swimming in the lakes that are being created, the wakes that are being created by these leading applications that will fundamentally change experiences.
And Rupa, you keep an eye on this. I think you mentioned it too. What are your thoughts about the use of adopting AI present and going forward as it applies to our key topic here, which is flexible e-commerce?
It's turned into a practice of itself, at least at Perficient. AI is everywhere. We're not the only ones talking about it. AI is powering everything today. When we talk about predicting ordering to smart chatbots, I mean, when I was looking at the Forrester report, well, many companies, they experimented AI in 2024. Just in 2025, they're outproving ROI. Like they're seamlessly scaling as long as it's done responsibly. There's a lot of velocity that we see just within the industry, but also at organizations. Myron said that AI is here to replace your job, but not really. At the same time, it's like looking at those high impact use cases, Mark, that are going to drive that. And I think the obvious ones that we talked about, intelligent search or automated quoting or building from there. But if I just scale the conversation back a notch from how B2B and the B2C experiences are becoming one, and people that are getting a AI-driven experience in the B2C space in their personal lives, when they come to work, they expect the same thing. So for those that have not looked at Wayfair's new AI Muse, I highly encourage you go check it out. But when we think about distribution space, the manufacturing, the B2B space, those that have implemented with AI, the natural ones are in the product space. Through some of those repeatable processes that can be fed into the well built out AI engine, customers are getting a repeat businesses. They are not only getting those improved customer engagement online and offline, but it's reducing your manual processes. It's increasing your average order value. So bringing those tactics back, driving from strategy that was defined with clear KPIs, that is going to give you a very, very driven outcome that you can actually see the monetary gains coming out of that. So AI is here to stay. We just have to use it responsibly.
We have about 3 or 4 minutes kind of left to go here, and I think I just find this whole topic fascinating. I think we're doing a nice across the board look at what's needed to put in place a flexible e-commerce platform. So I think we have time for one more question. I kind of call our lightning round question here, and then Rupa will start with you, then Myron will kind of go with you, then Raul, it's okay with you, and then Dennis, we'll circle back to you for kind of the closing thoughts here. But I'm going to call this the let's get real, deliver the goods question, which is ROI. So Rupa, let's start with you. This stuff does not exist if you don't have some kind of ROI expectation tied to your specific organizational goals and objectives. So how do you measure ROI of what a new flexible e-commerce platform should do for you, given everything we've just talked about for like the last hour?
Yeah, it's really gets tactical. You start with a very clearly defined strategy. You get your leadership on board. You define that governance model, but until you sit down and define what those real life KPIs are going to be, you're not going to see the ROI. And when I talk about that, I'm really thinking about, are you tracking your customer facing and operational metrics that drive your revenue growth? Whether it be your average order value, whether you're measuring your customer retention, how accurate your orders are, what is the time to quote? Again, analysts and the industries that are reporting companies that are maturing with digital commerce capabilities, they see twice the amount of faster revenue growth than their peers do. So that's pretty compelling argument right there. And
okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And Myron, what are your thoughts on how do you measure ROI at Partstown on some of these?
Yeah, so there's kind of two core metrics, right? The ROI was probably the easier one because it was very easy for us to calculate what a 1% improvement in conversion meant for from the sales revenue perspective, and it was an astronomical number. So that part was sort of easy to sort of identify. The other part, sort of key metric, was NPS. And VOC, and I'll use them somewhat interchangeably, but knowing sort of where you are in terms of customer sentiment also helps the sort of ROI argument. But ultimately, it kind of goes back to something that Rupa said, and that's strategy, right? If you don't know where you're going, any road's going to get you there. And so, to start this journey, I would go back to really crystallizing that strategy. All the things that others have shared throughout this conversation, I think, are critically important as well.
All right. Well, Dennis, boy, this is Dennis and Raul, let's kind of split the ticket here. We have about a minute to go. So Raul, quick thoughts on ROI, and I'm going to have to, we'll have to make them quick. We're coming from the top of the hour, I'm afraid. So what are your final thoughts?
So I think KPIs are absolutely important to be able to measure ROI, and it's definitely sit down with your executives, your business leaders, to define those KPIs clearly, and everyone is aligned to that. There are different ways to measure it, but I think each organization might have different KPIs or different ways to their goals. So I would say, sit down with your executive, your business stakeholders to clearly define the goals along with the KPIs, really.
Well, Raul, Myron, and Rupa, we can't thank you enough. And Dennis, we're going to pivot to you for the final thoughts here. Any final thoughts on measuring ROI? And then and I think equally as important, I believe you folks have a white paper that people can download for more information. So can you lead us out with talking about those two aspects of things?
Yeah, from an ROI perspective, Mark, one of the things I've certainly found, this is from direct experience in implementing e-commerce platforms myself in companies like Heineken and elsewhere. If you follow a pure traditional ROI model for your e-commerce platform, you may find that Excel wanting at some point. I think Rupa put it really well earlier on when she said, if you're not online, you're invisible. You need to somehow quantify the risks, the fundamental, actually, dare I say it, existential risk to your business of not providing a really great digital experience. I'm not entirely sure how you put that into an ROI, but it is a fundamental part of it. And so if you go to the traditional way of measuring success in relation to that, it may not work. You're just going to have to do it, right? And in relation to the white paper, yes, there's a fantastic white paper, which I think attached to the link of this or via DSG will be able to provide people with. And it's a longer exploration of this topic. And it provides some fantastic insights and advice for anybody who's considering either digitizing for the first time or re-platform to a more flexible approach in their digital channels. But thank you, Mark, as well, for facilitating. I really enjoyed the chat.
And I got to tell you, what a fascinating hour. And what a panel we had. Rupa, thank you. Myron, thank you. Dennis, thank you. And Raul, thank you. And that concludes our webinar for today. So I think it's great advice. Let's all go put it into play. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mark.
Thank you.